Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, so what happens when two people make a real estate deal? They both willingly break the law, and yet the highest court steps in to rescue just one of them. I mean, it sounds totally contradictory, right? But that is exactly the intriguing legal paradox we're unpacking today. We're diving into the fascinating Supreme Court case of Elizabeth Ong Lim versus Lazaro N. Cruz. It's this wild story about land, loans, broken rules, and how the scales of justice sometimes actually weigh social policy heavier than strict contract law. Okay, let's dive right into this. To unravel this complex decision, we're going to look at the land and the loan, the 10-year transfer ban, a quick detour into who actually has jurisdiction, the pari delicto doctrine, and finally, the Supreme Court's verdict. Part 1. The land and the loan. The setup. So back in 1994, the Department of Agrarian Reform awarded 2 parcels of land to a man named Lazaro Cruz. Fast forward 6 years to 2000, and Lazaro needed some capital. So he secured a 1.5 million peso loan from Elizabeth Lim, and he mortgaged his first parcel of land to her as security. But then, in 2002, which is just 8 years after he got the initial award, he went a step further. He outright sold the second parcel of land to Elizabeth for another 1.5 million pesos, just literally handing over the original land titles to her. Now, to put this into perspective, the real-world scale of this transaction is massive. Between those 2 parcels, we are talking about over 29,000 square meters of agricultural land. And for the sale of the second parcel alone, there's 1.5 million pesos on the line. I mean, this is a tremendous amount of property and money, right? Especially considering it was originally intended to lift a farmer out of poverty. But years later, Lazaro and his family realized they just couldn't pay back the loan, so they actually filed a lawsuit to get everything back, claiming the deals were totally illegal. Part 2, the 10-year transfer ban, the rule that started it all. The whole foundation of Lazaro's argument lies in Section 27 of Republic Act 6657, which is the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law. The absolutely crucial point of this law is a strict 10-year prohibition period. It mandates that lands acquired by agrarian beneficiaries absolutely, positively cannot be sold or transferred for 10 years. Now remember, Lazaro sold his land in 2002, merely 8 years after receiving his award in 1994. So he blatantly violated that 10-year ban. Now, sure, there are exceptions to this rule, but they are incredibly narrow. During that 10-year window, you can literally only transfer the land through hereditary succession, or you can sell it back to the government, the Land Bank of the Philippines, or to other qualified agrarian beneficiaries. And the core problem here? The sale to Elizabeth Lim didn't fall into any of those 4 strict categories. She wasn't the government, and she definitely wasn't a qualified farmer. So the sale was, by the absolute letter of the law, totally prohibited and void right from the start. Part 3. Who has jurisdiction? The legal detour. So during the trial, Elizabeth Lim actually tried to get the whole case thrown out. She argued it belonged in a specialized agrarian court. You see, the Department of Agrarian Reform Adjudication Board, or DARUB, handles agrarian disputes, but that requires a specific tenancy relationship, like a landlord and a farm worker sharing harvests. The regular regional trial court, on the other hand, handles civil disputes where no tenancy exists. The Supreme Court stepped in and ruled this case firmly belonged in the RTC. Elizabeth and Lazaro weren't a landlord and tenant. They were just a lender and a borrower, a buyer and a seller. So the regular court was exactly the right place for this battle. Part 4. The pari delicto doctrine, the climax of the case. When this case initially went to the trial court, things looked really bad for Lazaro Cruz. The judge actually denied Lazaro's request to annul the sale, essentially saying, hey, you're using your own violation of the law to try and profit. And this brings us to a really heavy-hitting legal doctrine, known as in pari delicto. It's a Latin term that basically just means in equal fault. The general rule in law is that if 2 parties willingly enter into an illegal or void contract, the courts are just going to wash their hands of the mess. They generally refuse to help either party and just leave them exactly where they are. And since both Lim and Cruz technically executed a prohibited contract, they were in equal fault. By that logic, Lazaro shouldn't get his land back, right? Well, here is the massive plot twist. The Supreme Court reversed this thinking by citing a vital exception in Article 1416 of the Civil Code. It states that if an agreement is prohibited by law for the specific protection of the plaintiff, that plaintiff can actually recover what they delivered as long as it enhances public policy. So in agrarian reform cases, the court won't apply that unequal fault rule. The state has this avowed bent towards social justice, and honestly, leaving the land with the buyer would defeat the whole spirit of freeing the tillers from the bondage of the soil. Drawing from a precedent known as the Philinvest case, the court applied 3 specific requisites to justify this exception. Number 1, the contract is merely prohibited, not illegal per se, meaning selling land isn't inherently evil or immoral like committing a crime. It's simply restricted by a specific statute. Number 2, the prohibition is for the plaintiff's protection. The whole 10-year ban exists purposefully to protect farmer beneficiaries from losing their land to eager buyers when they're financially vulnerable. And number 3, public policy is enhanced. Returning agricultural land to the landless farmer fulfills the very purpose of the Agrarian Reform Program. Because all 3 of these requisites were met, the court decided to protect the farmer despite his own willing participation in that prohibited sale. Part 5. The Supreme Court's verdict. The resolution. So how does the court balance protecting the farmer without completely robbing the buyer? To balance the scales, the court ordered an equitable solution. Lazaro Cruz gets what he asked for, the return of his sold land, Parcel 2, and the deed of sale is officially declared null and void. However, Elizabeth Lim is not left empty-handed. Because the contract is voided, both parties have to be restored to their original positions. So Lazaro is legally obligated to return the entire 1.5 million peso purchase price to Elizabeth, plus a 6% legal interest rate from the time the complaint was filed until it's fully paid off. Now, obviously, the Supreme Court doesn't just sit there with a calculator. The case was remanded or sent back down to the regional trial court. Since the Supreme Court is not a trier of facts, they directed the RTC to accurately determine and calculate the final exact mathematical payout Lazaro owes Elizabeth, with all that running interest included. We've seen how the highest court prioritizes social justice over strict contract rules to protect farmers. But it really leaves us with a provocative question. Is the 10-year prohibition actually enough to protect agrarian beneficiaries? If farmers are still driven to enter into these prohibited, high-stakes deals out of sheer financial desperation, is the law truly solving the root problem? It's definitely something to ponder as we consider the real-world implications of these legal texts. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.